I'm sitting at a table with our speakers today, and it made me feel old. We've got some wonderfully gifted people at the table. I know when I first came into the ministry, I always sought out the older pastors and ministry leaders so that I could learn from experience. And today I'm seeking out a lot of young people so I can learn from their essence. And God has really blessed the church with some wonderful young people. The first person that we have speaking with us, Matt Popovits, has served congregations, get this, in Texas and New York City. So leaving Texas and going to New York City, I'm sure, was a cultural experience. Matt serves in Queens and Manhattan, which in and of itself, if you know about the boroughs, is a nice cultural difference. Matt's congregation is Our Saviour, New York. He is a church planter. He is the lead pastor. And I would encourage you, if you have not been on his YouTube channel, you got to go there, Spiritual Howcast. I just used the one on generosity for our congregation. We've used the one on how to read the Bible. They're quick. They're witty, but they're substantive. He's also the author of a book called Tough Call, How to Engage Your Faith in Decision Making, and he writes for Homiletics, which is a magazine that assists those of us who can't preach to at least preach a little bit better. So he is husband of one, father of two, and pastor to many. Let's welcome Matt Popovits.
Thank you, brother. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for that really nice introduction. I am the husband to one. That's a good thing. That one is my high school sweetheart, Miss Lisa Popovits. She was known as Lisa Storr. She grew up in Arlington Heights. We met in middle school in the middle of Michigan, and we've been together ever since. And she is awesome. She's awesome for a number of reasons. She's awesome because she's willing to love me, but she's awesome because when I come to do things like this and hang out with people like you, she looks at me and says, okay. And she takes care of our kids and she makes life really comfortable for me. She's really, really fantastic. Let me make sure that this clicker works here. Perfect. There we go. The problem has always been self-righteousness. The problem has always been self-righteousness. I can safely say always because since the very beginning, like in the first 5 minutes of creation, we see self-righteousness emerge. We hear Satan whispering into the ears of Adam and Eve and telling them, "Did God really?" And all of a sudden, they are trying to assert themselves over and against the love of God. That's what self-righteousness really is. It's trying to prove your worth apart from the worth that God has already declared over you. And you want to prove it on your own. And so Satan comes in and he whispers, "Did God really say?" And all of a sudden, they go from knowing God loves them to wondering if God's just trying to keep them. And so in the middle of a garden of yes, they choose to eat the fruit of no. Not because they're hungry for food, but because they are hungry to prove themselves. The problem has always been self-righteousness. And nothing has changed. We're here at the Change or Die conference, but that's one thing that has and will stay the same. Self-righteousness is the problem in Wisconsin. It is certainly the problem in New York City. It's the problem in me. It's the problem in you, at least those of you that I've met already. It's the problem in the builders. It's the problem in the boomers. It's the problem in Gen X. It's the problem in millennials. It's the problem in whatever you call the people who come after the millennials. It's the problem in everybody. But what's changing now is not the fact that self-righteousness is the problem. Here's what's changing. What's changing are the tools, the means, the fruit we use to demonstrate our self-righteousness. I'm going to offer to you that a primary means of asserting our self-righteousness in the modern age is technology. And I say this as one who's wearing an Apple Watch, who has his notes on an iPad, and whose iPhone 7 is in the mail. I am not anti-technology, but I think we have to admit, as the new generation emerges, that this is perhaps the primary means in which our self-righteousness is extended and protected as a people. Now, chances are when I say that, something inside of you says, yeah, that seems about right. I mean, we express our self-righteousness in technology because we relentlessly use technology to advance the human experiment with the end in mind, and we all know what the end is to prove ourselves as not needing God. We express our self-righteousness by curating online identities that prove ourselves to be enviable in the eyes of our former high school classmates. We express our self-righteousness in technology by using it to rebel against God by indulging in every single one of our personal, delectable depravities. Thanks to technology, we as a people, we now gamble more than ever. We spend more money on pornography than we do on every major sports league combined in this country. It is truly America's pastime. And we binge watch horrible television shows like needless remakes of a wonderful television show called Full House. We are a depraved people. I bought my first computer in 1996. I was 16 years old. My parents couldn't afford it, so I convinced my grandfather to take me to the bank and help me get a loan as a 16-year-old for $2,200. And I promised I would pay him back, and I did. I paid him $90 a month for 2 years with money I scraped by on odd jobs. And on that computer, I wrote papers. I played games. I discovered the internet. Back then, for those of you who are maybe younger than me, back then the internet made a noise. It went like this. And that, my friends, was the sound of freedom. I discovered the internet to my own glory and to my own shame. Things have changed. I was ordained into the office of the holy ministry, as we like to say, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, smartphones weren't a thing. As recently as 2011, only 1/3 of Americans had a smartphone. Today, it's 2/3 of Americans. 46% of Americans, according to a recent Pew Research poll, will tell you that they simply can't live without their smartphones. 85% of young people under the age of 30 have a smartphone. Times have changed. Times have changed. This is a photo of a moment in time. This is a couple on their wedding day, just moments after their nuptials, checking their phones. Here's what I want to propose. That a primary means of asserting our righteousness in the emerging world is technology, but not technology as self-deification, although that's a part of it. Not merely technology as personality and identity curation, although that's a part of it. Not merely technology as enabling indulgence, but I would argue something simpler, something subtler, but arguably more sinister. Here's my proposal, that we in the modern age, and especially the emerging culture, we preserve our self-righteousness through technology by embracing the incessant and unending distraction that it affords. Will do. We preserve our self-righteousness through technology and the incessant and unending distraction it affords. I once saw a young child, maybe like 3 or 4 years old, being corrected by her mother at the grocery store. And in the middle of this mother's well-intended short speech where she got down on her knees and she got eye to eye with the kids, because that's what they teach you. Be eye to eye with the bratty kids. That's what they teach you. As the mother was getting eye to eye with her inconsolable daughter, and giving her this short speech on correcting her behavior, the little girl put her hands over her ears and simply started to sing. La 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 la. And it was her way of asserting her independence. It was her way of preserving her power by refusing the harsh words and the truth of her mother. Perhaps we, in the emerging generation, perhaps we are doing the same thing. With our constant connectedness, with our relentless checking, with our addictive scrolling, we are asserting our independence, we are protecting our world, we're distracting ourselves from the big questions of our souls and the deep pains within. Perhaps this is what's behind the millennials' famous inability to cope, or as the Babylon Bee puts it, local millennial diagnosed with tragic inability to even. Lutherans, we have a way of talking about the darkness within and the tinge of pain that we feel. It's called the sting of the law. The sting of the law that is felt at some point in every human heart. It's a sting that has to be addressed and confronted and answered, but in our day is being avoided. It often unearths itself in questions deep in the soul, like, am I enough? Am I acceptable? What about my brokenness? These are the deep questions and the deep pains that are kicked up and unearthed by the law. Both the law that just happens as you live your life and things don't work out, and the law that is preached to you on a Sunday morning, whether you like it or not. The law turns over the log and we look at the other side and we feel the nastiness underneath. But I would argue to you that we are using our technology more and more to avoid what we feel, present company included. A recent survey of female students at Baylor University, we can mock them because they're Baptist. It's Baylor University. That's humor. That's okay. I'm not being serious. I'm being serious. We would mock them if they were Methodist, but not because they're Baptist. Just kidding. Just kidding. It's all love here. All love and sarcasm. Sarcasm is my spiritual gift. That's what I've been told since I was born. I had a very sarcastic pastor once laid hands on me, and then I spoke in sarcastic tongues, and it's never stopped. There was a recent survey of female students at Baylor University that found that these female students at Baylor University, they use their phones an average of 10 hours a day. 3/4 of 18 to 24-year-olds and at least one 36-year-old in the room say they reach for their phones immediately upon waking up. A recent study in the UK said the average person checks their phone 221 times a day, or once every 4.3 minutes. Which reminds me real quick, just one second. I'm in the middle of something, talking to a bunch of Lutherans. If I don't help them change, they're going to die. It's very important. All right. A man named Nir Eyal wrote a book entitled Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And in this book, he argues that modern people are caught in a cycle of pain creation and pain alleviation, largely from technology. So you open up your technology and you see somebody else's life is thriving according to your Facebook news feed, and that creates pain in you, questions in you. But then what do? You open up another app to quiet that pain, to alleviate those questions, or you post your own picture to quiet the concerns in your soul that you're not enough, so you prove that you are. He says in this book that we feel something like boredom, worry, anxiety, and rather than feel it, what we tend to do as modern people is find a way to dismiss it. And so the argument in this book is, ultimately, if you want to create a product that takes the world by storm, you should create something that allows people to be diverted when they feel any tinge of emotional pain. And you'll rule the world with your app. So here's what this means for us. churches that are faithful in the not too distant future will seek to foster communities where deeply distracted people can gather around a distinct proclamation of the gospel. Churches that are faithful in the future will seek to foster communities where deeply distracted people can gather around a distinct proclamation of the gospel. Because we are distracting ourselves from the big questions and from our deep pain, and so we must do this. Here's what I mean by a distinct proclamation of the gospel. Not merely, and I don't mean to minimize the weight and the transformative power of this phrase, but for pedagogical purposes I will say this. Not merely you're forgiven, but more specifically to distracted people, we must say you are forgiven and you are free. You are free for what? You are free to listen to your fears. You are free to allow silence to let your struggles speak. You are free to admit your failures. Why? Because you have a God who entered into your mess, who took on flesh, put himself underneath the weight of every expectation, of every fear, allowed himself to be crushed by it, but who resurrected from it and overcame it and paid for your failures and fears and darkness with his own blood. Now you're forgiven and you're free to look the darkness that you discover inside in the eyes and know that no matter what you find, you are chosen, you are loved, you are redeemed, you are a child of God. That's the distinct proclamation of the gospel. Communities where it can be said, we are free to listen, we are free to confess, we are free to reflect, we are free to address the big questions and the deep pains, because no matter what we discover, and we must discover it, we are still forgiven. No matter what we discover when we let silence speak, we are still forgiven. Or put it like this, we must make it safe with our proclamation of the gospel for people to stop scrolling and to feel. We must make it safe with our proclamation of the gospel for people to stop scrolling and to feel who they are. Second, I think churches that are faithful in the not too distant future will foster communities where deeply distracted people are called to be fully present with others and are equipped to be faithful stewards of technology. We'll create communities where people are called to be fully present with other human beings and are equipped to be faithful stewards of technology. We tend to forget that we are still on the very early edges of the information age. And I believe that future generations are going to look back on us, where we are at our point in time, and look back and marvel at how overwhelmed we are by the new world that we live in, and how we are still struggling to be stewards of not money, not time, but opportunity and data. What if churches became the place that helped people put a premium on human connection? What if churches became known as the places that helped people put a premium on human beings coming face to face with other human beings? Churches did not reject technology. They used technology. They redeemed technology for the glory of God and the love of their neighbor. But they also became known as places of accountable respite from the constant distraction afforded by it. Churches became known as places of accountable respite from the distraction of technology. What does that look like practically? I have no idea. But I am feeling, so much of what I'm sharing with you is just stuff that I'm in the middle of being convicted by as a human being, and I'm noticing as a pastor, and I'm just feeling an obligation to articulate it and figure it out. So I'll check back with you later. Now, some of you might be pressing back as you hear this and say, well, Matt, I get what you're trying to say. We should create communities where there's a distinct proclamation of the gospel, and we should be known as a place where we put a premium on human interaction, and we teach people how to be accountable stewards of technology. I get all that, but isn't that what Sunday morning is already for? It's an hour a week where you can show up, you can hear the gospel, you can put down your dang phone and meet other people. I would say this, it's part of it. I mean, it has to be a part of it, but it won't be all of it. It is my firm but anecdotal belief that the hyper-connected emerging world of which I'm a part of, the hyper-connected and deeply distracted emerging world, are in need of communities of people. And communities don't simply happen in pews. They happen in apartments. They happen on patios and in pews. It needs to happen in places where like faces can meet and flesh can touch and questions can be asked and answers can be offered. So I pastor 2 churches in New York City. One is in the heart of Queens with some incredible second and third generation immigrant survivors. And then I pastor a church in Midtown Manhattan with some really talented artists and professional millennial strivers. Our church in Manhattan is mostly creatives and professionals. It's a growing community of people. We meet on Sunday nights. But among our most fervent and committed people at our Sunday gatherings, they are there twice a month. And they really want to be there, so they're there twice a month. If they're feeling particularly guilty, if they've gotten a call from their mom back in Wisconsin saying, oh, you going to church, right? That's my impression of people from it. Isn't that not good? Just put it on later on when you give a review, just put a review, just like Matt's impression 2, all right? If they're feeling particularly guilty, they'll come 3 times a month. But here's the really interesting thing. 90% of our people are involved in small groups in Midtown Manhattan outside of Sunday. They don't miss it for the world. Distracted and disconnected people are hungry, not just for righteousness, but they're hungry for relationships of accountability and acceptance more than ever before. They're hungry for relationships of acceptance. So I think we have a great opportunity to grab a hold of that hunger for relationships and create communities where a distinct proclamation of the gospel can be embedded to deeply distracted hearts who through their distraction are trying to preserve their sense of self-righteousness and avoid the deep pains and the tough questions. We can distinctly proclaim the gospel, and we can have communities where human beings interact with human beings, and it's safe for you to admit your fears because of Christ. It's safe for you to confess the darkness because of Christ and hear that you are forgiven through the work of Christ and be truly and fully known in the name of Christ, and have people who look at you and say, in love, put down the phone and be with me. Because no matter what I see in you, I still want to be here in this moment with you. That's a message that changes the new world. A few weeks ago, Andrew Sullivan, who used to be one of the premier bloggers and writers in the online world, he wrote a piece for New York Magazine that I highly recommend to you. And it's a piece that just deeply resonated with so much of what I've been wrestling with and struggling with in my personal life and in my pastoral leadership. It resonated with what I'm wrestling with as a pastor of a young congregation and as a deeply distracted man who's trying to preserve his own self-righteousness. If you know anything about Andrew Sullivan, he is, it's safe to say, not a Christian. But in this piece, he writes about his own struggle with being distracted. And he wrote this particular paragraph to me. He said this: "What if the churches came to understand that the greatest threat to faith today is not hedonism, but distraction? Perhaps they might begin to appeal anew to a frazzled digital generation. Christian leaders seem to think that they need more distraction to counter the distraction. Their services have degenerated into emotional spasms. Their spaces drowned with light and noise and locked shut throughout the day. When in fact, maybe it's their darkness and silence that might actually draw those whose minds and souls have grown web-weary." That spoke to me. If you're skeptical of his observations, I'll begin to land the plane here this morning just by sharing with you some portions of an email that was sent to me on Tuesday of this week. I share it with you with permission from the author, a wonderful young woman who attends our Midtown parish, a 27-year-old Manhattanite who is intelligent and faith-filled and upwardly mobile and incredible. I sent her a note, I sent her an email, actually linking to Sullivan's article, because I'd overheard her talking to someone else, mentioning that she had deleted Facebook off of her phone because it was just kind of destroying her soul. And it was bothering her. And so I said, Alex, I overheard this, couldn't help but overhear it. I would love your thoughts on this article, because for the last few weeks, it's been kicking me at the knees. Here's her response. I'll just read some of it to you. I don't have it on the screen. She wrote this. She said, "Pastor, I've been reflecting on faith, life, and my relationships. Social media is overall draining me. I'll tell you, it took me a massive amount of willpower to delete Facebook and Twitter from my phone, and then in all caps, which is the millennial way to say, this is really important." She reiterated, massive. "They say getting rid of Facebook is currently one of the hardest things you can do, like breaking up with someone. I try not to even take my phone with me to workouts, which allows me to actually hear the sounds of New York City early in the morning. I didn't have a smartphone when I moved to New York, and at that time I vowed I would never get one. Josh, her husband, still likes to bring that up, because how could any person not have a smartphone? But my attachment grew quickly, and I came to be the person who could not live without one. But have you ever left your phone at home while going to dinner?" All caps. "It's amazing." "I've started to leave my phone in my bag while waiting in long lines." This is a brilliant young woman. College-educated, upwardly mobile young woman full of faith in Jesus, whose mind is blown at the idea of leaving her phone in her bag for 5 minutes. Now, before you scoff at her, listen to your heart and confess that your mind is blown at the idea of setting aside your distractions too. The problem has always been self-righteousness. of protecting our worth apart from God, of silencing the voice of conviction, of pain, and silencing our need for someone greater. That has always been our struggle. But the means of how we silence that voice and preserve the building of our own worth, that means has changed. It used to be an apple in the tree. But now it is the apple in your pocket. What does it mean for us? What does it look like for us to create communities where people who are deeply distracted can feel and create space for them to be crushed by the reality of the law and feel it and sit in it for at least a moment? It's part of being fully human. And then hear the life-giving words, "You are loved. It is finished. You are forgiven. Because all the darkness you see has been paid for in blood." I don't know the answers to that question. But finding those answers, creating those communities, is one of the primary changes we need to make. Thank you, guys.